Trump coaxes an apology from Israel to Qatar and hails a peace deal that would free the hostages dead and alive and lead to an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza if Hamas accepts and disarms. On the brink of a federal government shutdown, Trump meets with congressional leaders at the White House. Dead end or off-ramp? Oregon sues the Trump administration over deployment of the National Guard into Portland. Oregon's Democratic Attorney General joins us to explain why. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. This was a day for negotiation at the White House. Negotiations require pressure and, importantly, a desire for different outcomes. Experience reminds us that even when a breakthrough is announced, momentum sometimes recedes, and the status quo presses stubbornly forward. At the White House today, President Trump leaned on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to apologize to Qatar for an Israeli airstrike that violated Qatari sovereignty as it targeted Hamas leaders engaging in negotiations there. That was a precondition to Qatar to move to the next step with other Arab nations to support a White House-drafted peace deal, 20 points in all, to end the war in Gaza and gain the release of Israeli hostages, living and dead, as well as to a phased military withdrawal from Gaza, Israeli military withdrawal, and expanded humanitarian assistance inside Gaza. This deal is a framework with all the fragility that word implies in the Middle East, meaning each line subject to interpretation. Among the biggest asks, Hamas must disarm and play no role in a future of Palestinian governance, a stipulation that the Hamas leadership has yet to accept. Now, in its weakened state, Hamas may, I emphasize may, have to agree or risk incurring the wrath or indifference of historically sympathetic Arab nations. If Hamas says no, Netanyahu has vowed to carry the war in Gaza forward for as long as it takes. The other negotiation? With Congress over government funding. The White House and Congress, controlled entirely by Republicans, are on the verge of a shutdown that could limit basic federal services and result in sizable firings within the federal workforce, possibly firings much larger than those carried out thus far in the name of DOGE. What Trump wants and what levers congressional Democrats possess or merely imagine they possess was just tested face-to-face for the first time. Bipartisan congressional leaders just wrapped up a meeting with Trump at the White House. We have invited a House Republican and House Democrat to debate the various shutdown scenarios and potential ways out. Even by Trump standards, today was an eventful day at the White House. To guide us through it all, we turn to Ed O'Keefe. Ed O'Keefe, on the North Lawn of the White House, great to see you. Let's go through what happened in the Middle East. I want to play for our audience sound first from President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, both playing off what Hamas must do and what Hamas may face. Listen.
Everyone understands that the ultimate result must be the elimination of any danger posed in the region, and that danger is caused by Hamas. The tyranny of terror has to end, and this is, again, something that we're looking for. This is eternity. This is for forever.
I think we should understand that we're giving everybody a chance to have this done peacefully, something that will achieve all our war objectives without any further bloodshed. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done.
Ed O'Keefe, while this was happening, there were reports of intensified Israeli airstrikes inside Gaza. So where do things stand?
Well, everyone's waiting for Hamas, basically, Major, at this point. Comes public statement from them, some signal that they're willing to negotiate what is a 20-point comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict that, among other things, calls for the end of the war immediately if the two sides agree, work towards redeveloping the economy of Gaza, allowing Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence to leave Gaza and head to other countries without harm once the hostages have been released and prisoners sent back to Gaza, and all sorts of other sticking points, frankly, that while they may agree to talk about this, could spend months, if not years, negotiating over the details of this. One of the biggest ones, for example, the idea that you're going to set up a temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee to run the place until a different kind of government can be established. It wouldn't include any members of Hamas at all whatsoever. And then this board of peace that the president says he's going to co-chair with other leaders, including the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's remained intimately involved in these issues over the last several years, to somehow fund and oversee the policing, the establishment, the implementation of all these plans. But again, no word yet from Hamas that they've accepted this. And even if they do, as we've seen over the last several years now, talks between these two sides of a way getting started and then ultimately going nowhere.
Ed, it seemed very important to many observers that the president today at the White House engineered a phone call in which the Israeli prime minister apologized to the leader of Qatar over the Israeli strike there, and then the Qataris signing on to this, along with other Arab nations, indicating that they were not absolving Israel of its various grievances or the grievances they have with Israel over the conduct of the war in Gaza, but were prepared to move this forward. Did that in any way suggest that there has been a shift in alignment, or is that just what the White House is hoping has been achieved?
I think what it signals is that the president has spent an awful lot of time in recent weeks talking to the leaders of predominantly Arab or Muslim nations who have made clear to him, not only do we want this done, but there's economic incentive for everybody if we do. And to get that apology and that call made between the leader of Israel and Qatar and to try to settle that was a key priority for this White House, given how much Qatar has done to host these talks to try to move Hamas towards some kind of an agreement, and the fact, of course, that it hosts the largest military installation run by the Americans in the Middle East. They're a key ally that they have to be kept happy. So that was a key development today, certainly, and another sign of Israel's ongoing engagement with the Arab world, with its neighbors there, who are also eager to see this conflict ultimately ended.
All on to the shutdown, Ed, the other pressing matter before the president. Let me play you sound first from the Senate Minority Leader, Charles Schumer, Democrat from New York, and then the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Back to back, folks.
Yeah. It's up to the Republicans whether they want to shut down or not. We've made to the president some proposals. Our Republican leaders will have to talk to them about them, but ultimately he's the decision maker. And if he will accept some of the things we asked, which we think the American people are for, on health care and on rescissions, he can avoid a shutdown.
So if they want to talk about how to fix American health care policy, let's do it. The Speaker would love to do it. The Senate Majority Leader would love to do it. Let's work on it together. But let's do it in the context of an open government that's providing essential services to the American people. That's all that we're proposing to do. And the fact that they refuse to do that shows how unreasonable their position is.
Also, a quotable quote from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, we're headed toward a shutdown. Ed?
And it's because Democrats won't do the right thing, he said. What's interesting here, first of all, if you're a viewer who hears all this and thinks, wasn't the other side saying that last year and the other side was doing the other thing? You're not mistaken. Shoes are now on the other feet. Republicans run everything, and Democrats are the one potentially in the minority now withholding the support needed to keep things open. There's no denying that. But what the Democrats point out and what the White House has now signaled is there is an issue out there that needs to be discussed. And that is these tax incentives, these tax credits for millions of people who take the Affordable Care Act every year for their coverage and are going to see that tax cut expire this year if it isn't renewed. There are a handful of Republicans, including, I think, your next guest, who are concerned about that issue going forward, realizing it's bad politics back home because it will allow Democrats to say, they just raised your health care costs, those of you who are using this popular government-backed program, and they had an opportunity to debate and fix that problem. What Republicans are now saying, as you heard the Vice President say there, is happy to discuss that, but don't do it in these next 7 weeks when we'd like to extend funding and allow negotiations on the appropriations bills, the things that run the government, and this issue to commence. So just let's buy ourselves 7 weeks, keep the lights on, and then debate it. Democrats are saying, no, start that now, because if you don't start it now, you're going to try to make it worse later, and we're not going to let this issue go away. So that's kind of where things are. Likely headed now towards some kind of an impasse. What the resolution is unclear, but what Leader Schumer did say correctly is the president We had a chance to talk to him face to face. He's usually keen to make some kind of a deal with us. Let's see if one can ultimately happen. And Republicans need to be worried that the president will be hearing those offers from the Democrats and say, well, why not just come up with a bipartisan agreement and get it done? We'll see. To be continued.
Jointly setting up our next guest, Ed O'Keefe, on the North Lawn of the White House. I thank you, sir.
Take care.
New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler joins me now. Congressman, good to see you. Give me a bet from your perspective, the likelihood of a full government shutdown later this week?
Well, it's entirely up to Chuck Schumer, Major, and he seems to be barreling us right towards one. You know, this is a man who, during his career, has continually voted for CRs, has repeatedly lectured America about the need to keep government funded and open and the consequences of failing to do so. And yet here we are, and he is leading us down the precipice of a shutdown, which will impact not only the economy and our markets, but impact Americans who rely on the social safety net, those serving in our military, our first responders, our border security. These are quotes from Democrats for years telling everybody that this is why we can't shut down the government, and yet here they are refusing to pass the CR that House Republicans passed last week that is clean funding and keeps us open and operating through November 21st.
A CR means continuing resolution. It is what happens when Congress has not passed any appropriations bill or an insufficient number. Congressman, you know better than I do. Congress hasn't sent one appropriations bill of the 13 to President Trump's desk. Republicans own that failure. Why aren't you at least partially complicit in this?
Well, first of all, for over 30 years, Congress has not passed appropriations bills on time and individually.
I know, but I listened very carefully when you guys were campaigning for the majority that you would do it in a better, more efficient, more productive way.
Yep, and that's something that I and others continue to be working through, and it's why the Appropriations Committee has passed all 13 resolutions and appropriations packages. The Senate is working through theirs. We would like to get it done, and we would like to obviously pass all 13 individually as opposed to one big omnibus bill. But in the interim, with government funding slated to expire tomorrow, there is absolutely zero reason to allow the government to shut down. Just because we didn't pass all of the appropriations bills does not mean that you shut the government down. And Democrats have repeatedly said that. They have repeatedly voted for clean CRs when they've been in control and when they haven't been in control. The only difference here is that Donald Trump is president and Chuck Schumer is petrified of a primary from AOC. And so now he has a very different posture when it comes to keeping the government funded and open.
Where do you stand, Congressman Lawler, on extending the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act subsidies that were created in the American Rescue Plan, extended in the Inflation Reduction Act? By the numbers I've seen, if they are not extended by the end of this calendar year, on average, premiums could go up for those who would obtain the subsidies by 75%, 90% for Americans in rural parts of our country. And there might be as much as a 50% decline in marketplace enrollment. Are you okay with those stats?
Well, obviously, affordability is the number one issue, and it's why we passed the tax bill. The average New Yorker, for instance, is going to see a $4,000 tax cut. So I'm acutely aware of the challenges with affordability. It's why I've signed on to legislation to extend the ACA subsidy that was put in place during COVID. I've signed on to legislation to extend that by a year. I am very open to negotiation on this, including the potential of an income phase out. But the fact is that this is something that will be negotiated as part of a final appropriations package. To shut the government down would seem to hurt the very people that you're trying to help. And that's where I just think this whole idea of trying to tie all of this together and tie up keeping the government funded and open is illogical and short-sighted. So, look, I support extending it. It's just a question of how it's done, and you negotiate that.
Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine said today he could vote for a clean CR, meaning a continuing resolution, if there were assurances from the White House in writing that this matter of the Obamacare subsidies would be dealt with and dealt with in a serious legislative way. What did that tell you?
Look, I think some of my Democratic colleagues are looking for an off-ramp. I think they realize that it's an untenable position to shut the government down and is not going to go well once it is shut down. And so I think they're looking for an off-ramp. If that's the off-ramp they need, I'm already on record supporting extending it. So certainly, I've been encouraging the White House to that. But again, that's going to be part of a broader negotiation on the fiscal year 26 approach. If that's what Tim Kaine and others need, fine. But let's keep the government open and funded.
New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler. Appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.
Next, the view from the other side of the aisle on the looming government shutdown. Illinois Democratic Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski joins me live. You can see her right there. Plus a bit more detail on the gunman and arsonist who attacked worshipers inside of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Michigan Sunday morning. Everyone there has been accounted for, including the victims, and there's some evidence the gunman killed by law enforcement may have been hostile to the Mormon faith. And Bad Bunny and the Backlash. No, that's not a new band name. The NFL Super Bowl halftime headliner provokes some MAGA howls, and we explore the politics of an entertainer who has shunned U.S. concert dates over fear of immigration busts. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. As promised, joining me now, Illinois Democratic Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski. Congresswoman, great to have you here. Just for your knowledge, I've been covering shutdowns in Washington since the mid-1990s, and I know, as a threshold matter, reasonableness is always in the eye of the partisan beholder, okay? But the vice president just said it is unreasonable for Democrats not to allow the government to stay open while negotiations continue on health care and other matters. Why is that unreasonable?
Well, look, they've had 6 months to reach an agreement on a budget. They've been unable to do that. And what is really unreasonable is the manufactured health care crisis that Republicans are inflicting on communities that I represent in central and southern Illinois, a largely part of the rural part of America that have a lot of community health centers that are really facing very difficult decisions. When I hear from constituents on a regular basis about their increasing premium costs, healthcare is becoming unaffordable, and it's unreasonable for the Republicans to not be addressing this and to be barreling us down what looks like a path to a shutdown.
Well, how does the government shutting down, partial or in full, assist those constituents you just described? Because they're not going to get any help while the government is closed at any level.
Yeah, the government shutting down is the last thing that we want. But what we do want is, again, a seat at the table and for Republicans to acknowledge, again, the manufactured healthcare crisis that they have created, and looking at the budget as a way to actually address the tax credits that are going to be expiring from the ACA. Constituents in my district are going to get notices as soon as next month that their premiums are going to be increasing by at least $1,000. So these are things that are impacting working Americans in real time, and we feel very passionately that that should be a part of any budget negotiation, which is addressing this crisis that Republicans have created.
So based on your conversations in the Democratic cloakroom and whatever you've heard from the Democratic leadership, how does this week play out? It doesn't look like there's any off-ramp.
Well, look, I really hope that there were conversations today. It doesn't sound very optimistic that much was necessarily reached as far as negotiations go. I still hold out hope until midnight tomorrow that we'll be able to have everybody come to the table and Republicans realize that in order to get a CR passed, they're going to need Democrats in the Senate in particular to come along on that vote. And in order to do that, we're asking for something very simple. They need to at least be looking at extending the ACA tax credits or addressing the manufactured healthcare crisis that they've created around Medicaid. Something has to give. Democrats are just not going to continue to stand idly by while this healthcare crisis is inflicted on the American people.
The vice president again said something the White House says with some frequency, which is one of the asks from congressional Democrats is to somehow reestablish federal subsidies or Medicaid allotments for those who are undocumented in our country. It's against federal law for that to happen. What I'm curious about, Congresswoman, is how much do you hear about that concern from your constituents?
What I hear about are Americans in my district, constituents I have in the 13th district, facing difficult choices between paying their grocery bill and affording prescription drugs. Rising costs due to this administration's trade wars and rises on tariffs, and that's leading directly to increased costs for consumers. Instability and uncertainty for our farmers, the crisis that they are creating. I will also say not only does the government funding expire tomorrow, but so does the Farm Bill. None of these things, these have been failures of Republican leadership. They've been able to get these things done. And what I hear from my constituents is that they want relief, they want costs to go down, and they want accessible and affordable health care.
And what signal are you looking for, Congresswoman, that the posture from the White House or Senate Republican leadership is changing? Because right now it appears very hardened and very dead set on forcing your side to capitulate, and rapidly.
Well, it's unfortunate because I would say that they need to recognize the reality that in order to get a continuing resolution or a budget deal across the finish line, they need Democrats in the Senate to get that done. Democrats are making a very simple ask of the White House and Republican leadership, which is to acknowledge and address the manufactured healthcare crisis that they have created. They own this shutdown. They have made it very clear that they are the ones that are in charge in Washington, D.C. And so Democrats are asking for the votes that they will need to get this done and addressing the healthcare crisis in this country.
Does that mean that it has to be addressed before the shutdown is ended, or do you just need some assurances that it will be subject to negotiation and resolution by the end of the year?
I think we need clear assurances. I mean, clear assurances that this is going to be addressed. And that's not what it sounds like came out of the White House today.
Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski from Illinois, Democrat. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. Up next, protests against ICE raids in Portland. Oregon sues the Trump administration over deployment of the National Guard. The state's attorney general joins us to discuss live. Welcome back to the Takeout. As part of its ongoing lawsuit against the Trump administration, Oregon's attorney general today filed what legal beagles call a TRO. That's a temporary restraining order to block National Guard troops from being deployed to Portland. People gathered outside of the city's U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement building over the weekend were there to protest the White House's plan to send hundreds of National Guard troops right there. President Trump, by the way, is also expected to send National Guard forces to Tennessee and Illinois in the not-too-distant future. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield joins me now. Mr. Attorney General, welcome to the program. First of all, catch my audience up. What is the status of things right now in terms of whether or not the deployment has happened, is about to happen, about to arrive? Where are you?
You're kind of in this limbo stage right now. So we got notice Sunday morning that 200 National Guard troops were going to be federalized by the president and moved into the city of Portland. We immediately filed a lawsuit. And then this morning, we filed what they call a temporary restraining order to pause that action. As we sit here today, I'm not aware that the National Guard troops have actually posted. Frankly, we're very unclear about what their mission is at this point.
Would there be any mission in Portland, Mr. Attorney General, that you or your colleagues there would accept?
Listen, I think it doesn't matter what city you are in this country, doesn't matter what state you are in this country. We, as we sit in communities, we all believe in public safety and want to improve public safety. It should never be something that we're satisfied with. Bringing in the U.S. military into our cities is not how you do that. That's not leadership when it comes to improving public safety. That's more to score political points than it is anything else. If you were to talk to your local Portland police, what you would hear, and we actually have this in our drafted TRO motion that we filed, they are finding more activity around Portland nightlife than they are around the ICE facility in downtown Portland. So that's kind of the, I think, reality that we're experiencing right now. You know, if the president called our state, if they called any state and said, "Hey, what do you need in your state?" I think all of us would welcome that conversation. That's just not a conversation I think that this administration is wanting to have.
Mr. Attorney General, as you know, this played out previously this year in Los Angeles, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals generally backed the administration, citing the Supremacy Clause and its ability to protect federal facilities for the federalization of National Guard forces there. Aren't you up against the same legal structure?
Yes and no. The facts here in Oregon, and actually, you know, the nation, if you look at the law, is that the president has to meet really strict standards to be able to federalize the National Guard. And think about it, right? Like, as we're as Americans, we're not a third world country. We don't want the U.S. military wandering the streets in our cities. They are not there to do public safety. They aren't trained, frankly, to do that type of work. So we have laws in place that prevent them from doing that, prevent the president from doing that, I should say. And so you got to have an invasion. Well, certainly there's not an invasion in Oregon. You got to have a rebellion. We don't have one of those. And the third thing is the president can't be able to effectuate the laws of the United States. And that is not the case here in Oregon. We believe there's incredibly strong facts, and that's why we immediately moved for that temporary restraining order to pause it. Now, I do agree that, you know, presidents should actually have a lot of deference to be able to respond to emerging conditions in our communities. This is a case, though, where it is extreme. And the president is basing his facts on social media gossip rather than the facts on the ground. And that's the difference. That's what we're seeing right now.
Mr. Attorney General, I want you to address what the president describes as a war ravaged, that's a direct quote from the president, city of Portland, under attack by Antifa, which he has declared a domestic terrorist organization. I want you to evaluate those two things. And as I look at the statistics my team put together, homicide down 50%, motor vehicle theft down, but arson and drug offenses way, way up. So there's a problem there, isn't there?
When you look at major harm or, like, what I would say significant crimes involving persons, they're down 51% in the Portland area since the beginning of the year. And you have a president, again, that I am surprised. How many years have we been at this? That nobody takes his phone away from him when he's tweeting these types of things. The type of stuff that he's tweeting are factually inaccurate. We have in our memorandums, the Portland police is talking about what's the reality on the ground. It's completely inconsistent with what the president says. Now, that's not unusual. Obviously, we've been dealing with this president for a very long time, and the things he tweets out is not always grounded in truth. And that's what the courts are for, right? We're going to get in front of a judge and talk about what the reality is in the ground. And when you do that, I feel real confident that we'll be able to sit there and show what the truth is.
Real quickly, any uncomfortableness that you possess, Mr. Attorney General, with this idea that Antifa is a domestic terror organization?
I think they went down that path when they were in the first Trump administration. I think top lines, right? We do believe in American society that freedom of speech is important and you should be able to protest. Some of the biggest things that we've done in our society have been done through peaceful protests. However, if you're going to protest and you're going to break the law, there should be accountability. And that is going on in Oregon. We have the Portland Police, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, we have Oregon State Police, and we have the District Attorney in Multnomah County that will make arrests and prosecute when people are violating the law. You don't need the United States military to come into a city. Again, we're not a third world country. We shouldn't accept that as Americans. We should use the right resources to keep our communities safe.
Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield. Mr. Attorney General, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Comey indictment confusion. Why the judge reviewing the case was perplexed over the charges. We're going to explain all that next. Welcome back to the Takeout. Thank you for hanging out with us. Transcripts from the court session where a federal grand jury returned the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey reveal the prosecution's handling of the case left the judge confused. Comey was ultimately charged with one count of making false statements to Congress and one count of obstruction of justice. Scott McFarland joins us now. Why the confusion?
Well, the new U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, in her first job ever as a prosecutor, signed two different charging instruments in this case, which is untraditional. The judge, according to the transcript, said she'd never seen this before, but isn't going to impact the case itself. We know that late this afternoon, the formal record was submitted that Patrick Fitzgerald will be James Comey's defense lawyer, powerhouse defense attorney and former U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois. We know James Comey goes for an arraignment Thursday, a week from Thursday, in Alexandria, Virginia. But there's always the possibility, Major, the Department of Justice comes in with a superseding indictment, a newer, larger indictment that adds more charges, or at least adds more detail to a bare-bones charging document so far.
Why are you thinking that might happen?
Because so little is in this initial indictment. There's such little detail. It's boilerplate almost. It's barely a page and a half. And these allegations against a high-profile defendant could come with a larger explanation, more details, or even more charges before now and then.
Scott, importantly, over the weekend, the president and others around him in the echo chamber of MAGA began to talk about FBI agents and January 6th and pre-positioning or involvement. Help my audience, help our audience understand fact and fiction.
Well, let me draw the connective tissue first to James Comey. The president last night indicated he may seek or monitor an investigation of former FBI Director Chris Wray, who oversaw the FBI's response to January 6th. In the same weekend, though, the president perpetuated a conspiracy theory that FBI agents may have been on the ground and helped incite the Capitol riot, citing some new reporting with some newly released FBI documents. What those documents show, according to a review by CBS News, is there were FBI agents who responded to the insurrection, were there after the attack began. There's been no indication, none, that anybody in the FBI was part of firing up or directing the crowd. And we know that in part because the documents don't show that. There's been no evidence of that in 4.5 years. And about 1,500 January 6 defendants sought to defend themselves. Not one ever offered a shred of evidence in that regard.
Not to mention the video evidence and eyewitness testimony that said that crowd needed no incitement from FBI sources or any other. Scott McFarland, as always, thank you very much, sir. A big shakeup, well, kind of, in the New York City mayoral race. Mayor Eric Adams is out. Will his exit derail Democratic Socialists? That's how he's described himself. Zohran Mamdani's frontrunner status. We will explore next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. The FBI described the deadly attack at a church in Michigan as an act of targeted violence. That's a quote. The FBI has not described it as an act of domestic terrorism. 4 people attending the church service were killed. Law enforcement killed the gunman. 8 others worshiping at that time were shot and are recovering. Police say Thomas Jacob Sanford, age 40, on Sunday morning drove a vehicle through the front doors of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc Township, Michigan, and opened fire. He also set the church on fire with gasoline. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told Fox News today the suspect, quote, hated people of the Mormon faith, unquote. Here's some numbers, no math, just some numbers, so pay attention. New York City is counting on $7.4 billion in federal funding for its 2026 budget. That is 6.4% of all city spending, according to the state's comptroller. Why do I bring this up? Well, today, President Trump said much, if not all of that money, could be held back if Zohran Mamdani wins the mayor's race, a contest that lost one badly trailing competitor yesterday when Mayor Eric Adams, running as an independent, dropped out. Mamdani said today that Trump was, quote, going through the stages of grief, unquote, at the prospect of him becoming New York's next mayor. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo remains in the race, as does Republican Curtis Sliwa. Mamdani, running as a Democratic Socialist, retains in that race a double-digit lead. I want to bring in our reporter panel Riley Rogerson reports for Notice. Remember, that's News of the U.S. And Matt Brown for the good old Associated Press, which stands for Associated Press. Great to have you both here. Your thoughts, either one of you, who wants to go first on New York's mayor's race, which we cannot simply talk about too much. Riley?
What I'm paying attention to mostly is how this is playing out on Capitol Hill. There has been an unbelievable amount of pressure on Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who are both from New York, to weigh in on this. And now that Eric Adams is out of the race, I'm really curious if this is going to incentivize them to weigh in or they're going to continue to keep their distance.
Because they still haven't.
They have not.
Not formally endorsed. They haven't even said what Kamala Harris has said, which Mamdani is the Democratic nominee. I support the Democratic nominee, which is a kind of shouldering up, but not a full embrace.
Yep, they have not even done that.
Matt?
No, and it's remarkable because while they haven't commented on endorsing Mamdani, they have had conversations with the leading Democratic nominee, but they had House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries actually did come out with a statement after Eric Adams dropped out and commended him for his service for the city, which we should just say that Eric Adams dropping out of this race is simultaneously something that is to be expected given Adams's poll numbers. I mean, he was polling behind the Republican, behind Mamdani, behind Cuomo in many polls, but also is extremely remarkable for a sitting mayor of New York City to not be reelected. That is something that very rarely happens in New York City politics, and it's something that also might be a harbinger for, what is the future of Adams in this. Can he maintain his popularity here, or what is his relationship going to be like in politics going forward?
Your thoughts, Matt, on where we stand on the shutdown and the various posturing beforehand?
Well, it's interesting. We've seen over the last couple of weeks, Republicans and Democrats have given their talking points. They've, argued with each other and refused to sit down. Finally, we had a conversation between the leaders of the Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and House with President Trump, just as the White House here. And you saw there that they are still entirely on different sides of the universe on this.
Still on their talking points.
Still on their talking points. And I think that this is going to be interesting now that they're really already gearing up for a shutdown or coming up with their justifications when it comes to, what healthcare policies they're going to be focused on and where they're going to, how they can see themselves getting out of this quagmire.
Riley?
Right. That is exactly what I'm hearing from sources on Capitol Hill. The conversation is less, will there be a shutdown? And now, how do we get out of a shutdown?
And how long will it last?
Exactly. That's what I'm hearing. Sources are asking me, how long do you think it's going to last? And I'm like, hey, you work on Capitol Hill. You tell me.
I wasn't elected here. You have the votes. You run the committees. You're in charge, not me. We just observe. Yes.
Right. And I think right now people they don't know. People don't know if it's going to be the Democrats or the Republicans who are going to cave. But clearly, one party is going to have to give a little for this to end, and it's just unclear which one that will be.
And Matt, do you have any sense of the underlying issue which Democrats have identified, which is health care, and Republicans have identified, look, we can discuss that, but first you got to keep the government open on a nonpartisan basis with a 7-week continuing resolution, no poison pills in there, no Republican policy priorities, which has happened in previous shutdown standoffs. Republicans are trying to be the reasonable governing class. Democrats are identifying one issue that they believe can pierce through that.
Well, to your point, what's interesting about this scenario is that Democrats were very successful early on in making this shutdown about health care in a lot of ways, but they've been less successful so far in justifying or coming up with an explanation for how, say, the ACA credits could be continued or how...
who pays for it and how.
Exactly. What would be the actual plan and how would you actually negotiate that from their positions? Whereas Republicans actually have now zeroed in on that as an issue. They've put out a lot of talking points that fact checkers are running through right now when it comes to questions of how much it would increase the deficit to be doing that, what that means for health care for undocumented immigrants and whatnot. But given the unity inside of the Republicans on their message on this, Democrats are now scrambling to figure out how do they respond to that.
And Riley, the backdrop for this is Democratic voters and activists want the party to fight. And they see other evidence of things that discourage them or anger them. Like over the weekend, Missouri's Republican governor signed redistricting, which eliminates possibly one Democratic seat in Missouri. Democrats look at that and say, this is a partisan thing. We have to fight partisan fire with partisan fire.
Right. And we're seeing California Governor Gavin Newsom try to do that with the maps in California. He's putting that up to a vote in November. So we'll see what happens with that. But absolutely, redistricting is an issue where the Democratic base is insisting that leaders in the party fight fire with fire. This all started a couple of months ago with Texas, and it's continuing. And now we're seeing, like you mentioned, the first map being signed into law that does eliminate a Democratic seat. And if Democrats do sit back and they don't match this redistricting with their own redistricting, there could be huge consequences for control of the House of Representatives. And that's not something the base is taking lightly.
And the shutdown scenario may ultimately come down to how you define fight and how much stomach you have for that fight. Matt Brown, Riley Rogerson, thank you so very much for coming in. I appreciate it. Change of heart for one of music's biggest stars, the gig that's bringing Bad Bunny back to the stage in the continental, that's important, continental United States. I'll explain why next here on The Takeout.
Se acostó temprano, mañana hay que estudiar. Pero llamó a la amiga diciendo pa' janguear.
That was the NFL's way of making it very official that Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny will headline the 2026 Super Bowl halftime show. Big deal. That move has drawn the ire, though, of some conservatives online. Many are attacking Bad Bunny over his criticism of ICE and President Trump, as well as most of his songs not being performed in English. We're going to get some clarification on that, as well as other pop culture and political fault lines that have erupted over this with CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez, who has spent most of her career navigating the Latino Republican coalition lines and formations. And you have a lot of insight here. So I want to know, how important is it, A, for Bad Bunny to get this?
Yeah.
And what do you make of the reaction to it online from some in the MAGA world?
Well, I think we have to look at the fact that the NFL didn't book Bad Bunny for its heritage. They booked him for the math and the growth, the chart, the market share. He is a global phenomenon. And it's something we talked about at CBSN 5 years ago. We pointed out the fact that this type of music, whether it was reggaeton or trap, was really seen as something that was growing in Latin America, in Mexico, in Spanish. And in the United States, in 2016, there were 5 songs that were predominantly Spanish on the top 100. A year later, there were 19. And now if you look at the rise of that, there's this kind of consternation, I would say, certainly among my colleagues, my conservative colleagues on the right, who say, how can you have songs in Spanish dominating U.S. charts, American football? Why would that even happen?
That's what people want. I mean, they're buying it. It's their choice.
It is a global rage. And if you think about the fact that the NFL is trying to expand internationally, and their second biggest market is Latin America, but now they're in Madrid for the first time. They're growing all over Europe. The third most streamed global artist in the world is Bad Bunny.
Right. And so how about the President Trump of it all, the ICE of it all, not having dates in the United States for fear that there could be ICE actions, enforcement or otherwise, doesn't have any concerts here, endorsed Kamala in 2024. What about all that?
Okay, if we try to frame the NFL halftime show in a political narrative, it's going to make a lot of conservatives upset. He's not speaking English. They would say he was against the president. But have we put that type of test against any other performer for a halftime show, that entertaining show? If you go back, I mean, who would be Lee Greenwood, and Jason Aldean? I would love that if you want to appease the conservatives on the right. But if you're looking at global numbers, the NFL sees that and sees, who their audience is.
And very quickly, Bad Bunny might also have some other folks on stage. That's sort of been the trend line for the last 3 or 4 years. You're the headliner and you bring a bunch of other folks up there.
He was on stage in 2020 when J-Lo and Shakira performed in the halftime show. But when you're talking about language, I think the part people get, we cannot be so indignant on the right when we want to mirror that on the left and say that we can't just call things out because we don't like them. I think it's a bigger phenomenon that brings people together. And we got to look at the business of the NFL expansion and our dominant sports industry versus just the language and the political choices of someone who's become just incredible.
And the Super Bowl is a melting pot of culture, sports, and commerce.
Thank gosh that we don't ask how they vote.
Thank you for that perspective. Happy Monday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever.